Hello, Sex Therapy 101 friends. You notice I might have taken a break, but we're back and we're excited. And I'm really passionate about this new series that I'm going to be offering to all of you. I haven't disappeared. I've been working on some projects that are really meaningful to me. And one of those is a book for the public about my research about regarding long-term outcomes of consenting to unwanted sex, or duty sex, as we sometimes call it. And in doing that, adding to my own research over the year, you'll see my hair change, my face change, because these were all recorded over the course of a year. And I wanted to talk to experts about the cultural implications or cultural beliefs or the cultural ideas among different communities in the US that might protect people against negative outcomes and that might actually kind of promote people into some of the more negative outcomes. And that is the series I have to offer you. I'm really excited. It's been really meaningful to me. It's been enlightening to me. It's really helped me make sure that this book is what I want it to be for all of you. So with no ado, here we go. This is going to be the intro for the whole series. And I'll give you a little bit of a bio for each, and then we'll jump into the recording of the interview. Get ready for a really fun conversation with Vernacchio, who has a master's in education, teaches comprehensive sex ed at the Friends Central School in Pennsylvania. He's the coordinator of gender, sexuality, and consent education, a senior staff member in the Department of Institutional Diversity, Equity, and Justice, and is also a member of the Upper School English Department. Al is forthright. He is funny. He's compassionate, and he supports his students, school communities, and family to help develop healthy sexuality in younger people of all ages.
Hi, Cami.
Hi, how are you, Al?
I'm really great, thanks. How are you?
I'm good. Good. It's really, really nice to talk to you this morning.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I really appreciate just, I think, all the depth you can add to this conversation just because you feel you have a foot in so many cool communities,
Yeah.
right? So, um, and I do kind of want to treat this as maybe like the beginning of a conversation, right? And
I would
I'm
love that.
yeah, and I'm like, hey, what's everyone think about this thing I think maybe we found as Lisa Diamond and I were doing this research. And so that first question, with your lens, your background, your experience in sexuality, how are you interpreting these findings about these outcomes we're seeing women have by consenting to sex they don't want long
Yeah.
term?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I was troubled by the results. And to my mind, I have a hard time calling it consenting.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
I don't think they are consenting, but I
Yeah.
don't think they know that.
Tell
Um,
me more about your lens of consent and coercion and why that's where you were thinking.
yeah. So one of the things that I try to do a lot in my work is get us, excuse me, is get us to think about um, the language that we use um, and find places where we're using language that um, that we might that we might have just sort of like adopted. Like, for example, sexual activity is a phrase that I really challenge my students to think about what that means.
Hmm.
Um, this assumption that it's penetrative and penis
Hmm.
driven and that kind of stuff. So for me, the women in your study, when they're saying they're consenting to this unwanted sex, they're like, is consent really the right word? They're agreeing to it.
Agreeing.
They're assent. They're settling for it. They're
Like acquiescing
acquiescing.
almost,
Right, there
or
you go.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. But but I think of consent as kind of enthusiastic and really affirmative. And these women don't seem like they're into it. And I think
Yeah,
there's a million reasons for that that we
sure.
can talk about. But but I think that I think we have a culture that is very misinformed about what consent really
Mm-hmm.
means.
Mm-hmm.
And that labels a lot of things consent that probably should be labeled something else. And I don't even know if we have the language for
Yeah,
what it should be labeled. We
we
might
have
need a
like
new word.
we have consent and coercion. They're these two
Right. We have consent,
extremes on a
coercion,
continuum.
assault. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't think we would call this assault.
Mm-hmm.
Is it
Right.
coercive? In some cases it's not.
I know. Yeah.
But these women don't really want it, but they're doing it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has a lot to do with the way we socialize girls and women and the way we socialize men. I think it has a lot to do with the way our culture um, sort of um, talks about sexual activity and the what it is and the place it has in a relationship. So I was so excited by your research because it sent me in a million different directions in thinking about this
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about me as a sexuality educator and what can I do when I'm working with young people to create some foundation that maybe would help people not fall into this dynamic
Yeah.
that a lot of the women that you're interviewing have fallen into. I want to be clear. I don't think it's their fault. I don't think they're doing
Sure.
anything wrong, but I think that they don't have a conceptual model
Uh,
of relationship sex and consent
mm-hmm.
and sex that
Mm-hmm.
allows them to frame this in any way other than I consented.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're saying we don't even have the language yet for maybe what this is.
Yeah, I
Like
don't know that we
consent
have.
would be enthusiastic, and this
Consent would be
isn't that.
enthusiastic and affirmative and I think for me, um, really healthy consent conveys um, a sense of, if not excitement, then at least interest. And
Mm,
I think the thing that I saw, or the thing that, as you were talking in the clip you sent me about your research, is that some of these women aren't even really interested in having sex. Like they're
mm,
fine, they're okay with it, but they'd rather do something else.
mhm.
And but for whatever reason, they feel like they either can't or don't know how to, or feel prohibited in some way from doing that. And it might be prohibited on the um, not from their partner sense, but in their own sense.
Right.
Like, I don't know that I can really assert myself here.
Right. And I had that same feeling as I was reading through some of the qualitative statements. Some women, it was known, their husband knew this was happening. And there were other women who were actively concealing this,
Yeah,
right? And so it was
right,
this internal pressure of, I have to do this. And it
right,
wasn't always coming from the partner saying, I need you to do this.
right. No, and that jives with what we see with young teenage girls when they're beginning their sexual lives. That a lot of them are uh, uh, they're not having pressure from their partners, but they don't really know how to say, "I'd like something different," or
Mhm.
"Is this the right time?" Or yeah. So I think that when they when they have those early experiences of what I call non-consensual, but not in the same way of assault or coercion,
Mhm.
sexual activity, that sets them up for when they get into relationships, just
Mhm.
acquiescing, for lack of a better word. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Are you comfortable moving on to question two, or were there some more
absolutely.
thoughts you had? Okay.
No, absolutely. Yeah,
So you did mention culture.
yeah,
What culture is this American culture? You hold a really cool space in the Protestant or Quaker world.
right,
Is this a Christian thing? Is this a Protestant thing? Is this a US thing? Is this a female thing?
right.
When you talk about culture, what were your
Yeah.
thoughts?
So I think it's multicultural. I think
Mhm.
certainly um, American patriarchal capitalist culture is rife with sexism
Mhm.
and um, and does not afford sexual equity to female-bodied people and people who identify as women in the way that I would like us to see it do that. Um,
Mhm.
I think certainly, I don't think Quaker, but I think many Christian cultures
Mm-hmm.
have a very patriarchal view of relationships and sex, and I think that makes it difficult.
Right,
Quakers,
because Quakers specifically are like non-hierarchical, right?
right?
That's almost,
Quakers are
yeah.
non-hierarchical. We are equity and equality are two of our core testimonies. So I
Mm-hmm.
think what you would find in a Quaker theology of sex is something that looks much more egalitarian and really does give people permission to say what they want. Now, that doesn't mean that Quakers aren't influenced by all the other cultural
Mm-hmm.
aspects around them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think Quaker relationships are perfect by any means, but
Mm-hmm.
I do think that from a theological standpoint, they are much less likely to be hierarchical and
Mm-hmm.
patriarchal and sex negative. Also, I think a lot of Christianity. My undergraduate degree is in theology,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Mm-hmm.
spent my early life being Catholic, and then became a Quaker.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think that one of the things that led me to Quakerism was this this sense of not only equity and justice around gender, but also this sense that sex was not anything inherently sinful or
Mm-hmm.
dirty or problematic, and that it really is supposed to be this affirming, um, life giving, not in the reproduction way, but in the spirit way
Yeah.
experience. And and that's the other sad thing about this, is that it just seems like the sexual experiences that these couples are having isn't really, is certainly for the women that you talk to, doesn't feel life-giving, doesn't
Yeah.
feel spirit affirming.
Yeah.
It feels necessary or
Mm.
obligatory or
And
just
expending a
expected.
cost to, I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah.
mm,
And certainly they're also getting some benefit from it, because they wouldn't do it
mhm,
if they weren't getting something out of it.
mhm,
But when you think about equity and like, what are we getting out of this experience? I'm not sure there's equity at all in what one partner is getting versus the other in that
mhm,
kind of experience.
mhm. Cool language you're introducing here that's coming from your cultural background of
Mhm.
your Quakerism. And I'm hearing you say that it's, in your view, it's probably multiculturalism in that any culture that has a hierarchy, you're going to see more of this. Is that kind of
Yeah,
what I'm hearing you say? And
yeah,
that
and
we've
yeah,
got a lot of cultures with
right,
hierarchy and patriarchy.
right. And
Mhm,
so it's intersectional, right? So
mhm,
if you're female by biology or by identity, that's one culture. And then if you're
mhm,
American, and then if you're Christian, and then if you're, you know, whatever your political
mhm,
affiliations are. So it's um, they all bump against and influence each other. And it might be interesting to see in your study, um, looking at some of the other cultural dimensions that these women are part of, and
yeah.
are there other aspects that actually um, make it more likely
Mhm,
that they
mhm.
would assent to this, or they would acquiesce to this, you know, um, uh, consensual but unwanted sexual contact.
Yeah, yeah. I I was hoping for diversity in my research, and it just ended up being really
Oh,
homogeneous.
of
So
course.
I'm like, is this a white middle class Christian woman, Western United States thing that I didn't intend that to be the population, but that's who
Right.
self-selected.
Sure.
And
Sure.
but I like this idea that there's multicultural, that there's can be a lot of influences, but if there's a hierarchy, that's going to have more of an influence than if one of the core values of that community was equity and
Sure.
egalitarianism.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's also a difference between communities that say they value
Mm,
equality and what that looks like in practice. So
sure.
I think it also, there's a lot of communities that will talk about equality, but I do think in some of the more conservative Christian communities, they specifically don't talk about that. They really do have very different
Mhm.
places. And that, for me, the thing is different just different, or is different hierarchical?
Mm-hmm.
In
Mm-hmm.
places where difference is hierarchical, that's where we see a lot of problematic outcomes. When I'm talking to third graders and fourth graders about gender, we play a game where I call it just different or better or worse. And so I give them pairs of things, right? So like a penny and a quarter. Are they
Mm-hmm.
just different, or is one better than the other? You know, a raincoat and umbrella. And
Mm-hmm.
we can have preferences about things, and we can see things as different, but the problem, I think, comes from when we start imposing hierarchy on difference.
Mm-hmm.
And difference means this is better and this is worse. So if in your relationship men and women are different, but men have more power than women, that's going to set up a dynamic that much more leads to the kind of things you found than
Mm-hmm.
if different were not seen as hierarchical.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. That's helpful. Okay. Third question. Um, do you see within you already said some of this, within
Yeah.
the Quaker community or the larger Protestant community, um, factors of culture that might, protect or be protective
Mhm.
of this?
Yeah, certainly. I think um, the way that a culture's fundamental assumptions about gender are really important and can be protective. Um, I think that um, I don't know if this is a cultural factor, but I certainly think the level of sexuality education and the quality of
Mm-hmm.
sexuality education that people get at all ages and stages of their life can be protective. I think that um, the way we're taught how to communicate, um, can be protective. So much of consent education is about giving people language to be able, giving them permission to say what they want and giving them language to express that, what they want and what they don't want.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Which I believe, you correct me if I'm
yeah,
wrong, which I believe in your community is a major pillar that people can say
sure.
when they want to or don't want to, like the way that even meetings are arranged,
Oh,
right? Like
sure. Yeah,
there's
yeah.
this focus on communication skills and choice and when
Yes.
and what you want to share. Am I
You're absolutely
interpreting
right.
that right?
And the other thing I would say is that, especially in Quaker communities, the most fundamental assumption in like if Quakers have a theology, which is tough to say,
Mm-hmm.
our most core belief is that every person contains the divine within them.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever we are interacting with another person, we are interacting with a person who has the divine light within them. So we have to treat them according to that. And so that leads to egalitarian, that leads to not being oppressive, that leads to valuing people simply for inherently because they are, not because of what they do or can provide.
Mm-hmm.
So I also think that when you have that sense of inherent goodness and inherent worth, especially when that comes theologically, that can be a really big protective factor
Yeah.
because
I mean,
somebody believes automatically that they're worthy of love and belonging. That's Brene Brown's word, or they're
mhm,
worthy of being able to say no or
yeah.
to say what they want, and that what they want is important, and that what they want um, is a result of their being in touch with some kind of higher truth, higher core, higher being.
And that may or may not branch into broader Protestantism depending
Right,
on the sects.
right. And I think it does not. I think that most other mainstream Protestant um, sects would not. They would all say that God is within everybody, but
Hmm.
I think Quakers understand it in a way that is different,
Hmm.
um, and I would, in my opinion, better than some other mainstream, especially fundamentalist Protestant.
Well, I would agree.
Mhm.
Okay, what about, you are an expert in sexual health education, and you mentioned that as a protective,
Yeah.
depending on how much the community values education, that's going to influence this some too. Tell me some of the ways you see in your role as a sex educator, what's the solution to preventing this for People who are children now but will be adults later.
Yeah. Again, there's a wide variety of ways, but one of the things is, and this is really hard, like helping kids begin to critically assess and question the the water they swim in, the societal messaging that they get on the daily. What are they seeing in the cartoons they watch? What are they seeing in the behaviors they see from the grown-ups around them? What are they seeing in the toy ads that come out around the holidays? That developing that awareness that we are constantly being offered messages about who we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to act, what we're supposed to do, and that we actually have choice over whether we want to accept those or push back against those. And to do that requires a lot of skill. So there's awareness and then there's skill. And I think part of what happens is a lot of sex ed works on the skill and never looks at the awareness.
Oh,
So,
tell me a little bit more about that.
yeah, so I think what often happens is, we tell kids you have the right to say no to anything you don't want sexually, but
Right.
we don't tell kids, but that goes against all the messaging that you're being sold every day.
Yeah.
And so without that piece, then you think, well, I have the right to say no, but why is nobody listening to me? Or why isn't
Mm.
that working? I must be doing it wrong.
Why isn't it
Yeah,
working?
yeah,
Yes.
right. And whereas if you say, oh, okay, this isn't working, not because I'm doing something wrong, but because
Mm.
I'm pushing against something much bigger than just this person in front of me who's
Mm.
who's wanting. And then, how can we help young people um, talk to their partners, talk to their sweethearts about this sort of larger awareness that we help them develop? Because it's only with that, it's the same way of like, being in a minority group, right? If you're a person of color, you have a keen awareness of how white culture works. And you have to know that to be able to navigate.
Hmm.
Well, if you're white, you don't have to have that.
Right.
You navigate the world, you don't have to think about that. But the more awareness you have of that, the more you're able to become a better, anti-racist, anti-bias ally. So the
Mhm.
same thing. First, we have to get people to understand the messages impacting them and how it impacts them. And that's easier. Like it's easier to get girls to see that than boys to see that
Hmm.
in a very
Hmm.
binary way of
Sure.
talking about it. Um, but then what's hard is so I can get young women in my classes to see that they're being sold a bill of goods.
Mm.
But then what are you supposed to do with that?
Hmm.
How do
Right.
you what do you do around that? And part of what you do is you have to make the other people see that as well.
Mm.
Because once they see that, then they see, oh wait, I actually might be hurting you. And I don't want to do that. So
I
like I
think that that's
wonder,
really true here in this research
yeah,
because
yeah,
even as it's become an idea I'll talk about with my clients or that's starting to get talked about with other clients, I have this, mm, I don't want to be too accusatory of the partner involved
right,
here. So, so they're also operating from all the messages. They might not realize our entitlement
right.
messages. They might not realize our, and so I like how you pointed that out that we can't, in some of these situations, there might not be a villain, so to say, or a
Oh,
perpetrator,
right.
so to say, right?
And that's part of the problem with the language is that
Mm-hmm.
I don't, just from the research that you described, it doesn't feel coercive. It doesn't feel like there's a villain here. It feels
Mm-hmm.
like there's somebody asking for something, not realizing
Mm-hmm.
that their partner is not as into it or feel it, they don't recognize the pressures that their partners are feeling
Right.
to say yes, to acquiesce to this, that there's
Mm-hmm.
so much involved in what seems like a simple question, yes or no, but there's so much underneath that. And the more the sort of majority or dominant culture can become aware of that, the more they can realize two things. One is that it's actually, so from the guy's perspective, it's not my fault. I'm not a terrible person. I'm not a villain.
Mm-hmm.
I've been as what we're conditioned, programmed, I've been as swept up in this as anybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so the awareness is going to benefit me as well, because I become more free to be able not only to see things in my partner that I might not see, but I become able to see things that might allow me to decide what kind of person I want to be, you know?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think but we have such fear about that, especially in today's political climate. There's such fear about um, expanding knowledge or opening eyes or doing some critical analysis of the society the way it is. And I think it's because too many people have a zero sum mentality when it comes to this. Like, if you're going to get something, I'm going to lose something.
Mm-hmm.
But the goal is that we all have access to really good outcomes, whether it's sex or a relationship or, how to manage a home or how to raise kids. That what we're looking for are solutions that allow each of us to be our authentic selves, use our strengths, whatever they are, and and make the world better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think a lot of the guy, it would be interesting. It's a whole different study, but to go back and talk to the partners of these women
Yeah. Right.
and to really get a sense of what their understanding is. I think many of them would be really shocked and some probably devastated
Mm-hmm.
to learn that maybe they are inadvertently, causing their partners to do things that they really don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
some people say I give people too much credit, but I don't think so. I think
But that might be the world in that might be the way you want to engage
well,
with the
it's the way that
world.
I
Yeah.
frame
Like,
my life. I'm not afraid
yeah.
to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And once you get over the fear of looking at it, then you realize, oh, okay, it's not so
Mm-hmm.
bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a cost involved. Knowledge always has cost, but and one of the things you have to give up is your sense of you know being in control and being the top dog, and there's a real sense of safety that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
You feel more vulnerable, but
I
vulnerable is
appreciate
good.
vulnerable is good.
Yeah.
Scary, good, right? So as an educator, I like how you analyzed what needs to maybe some more emphasis in sex education, not just on the skills, but on the awareness. And in
Yeah.
this K through 12 world of sex education, a lot of that is thinking about, wait, where'd that message come from? Am I
Mhm.
aware of the influences that contribute to my decision making? And that I think you're right. Sometimes sex ed ends up sounding like the Just Say No to Drugs campaign, which we know didn't work.
Yeah.
And it's like, here's what you say when that happens, but then there's no follow-up of, well, what do I do when my partner's and like, oh, you're right. Oh, thank you so much for being honest. Oh, absolutely. Your body is what do you do when then it doesn't work? It doesn't
Yeah.
feel like it'll work. It'll feel like it'll
Right.
backfire.
Right.
Very cool. Okay. What about for adults who are
Mhm.
just becoming aware of this?
The thing that I often say to parents when I talk to them is
Mm-hmm.
that you can't go back and start from the beginning, right? You can't undo what's been done. You can't change the way you were brought up or what you internalized. So what is the first step you can take? What is it? What's the goal that you want? What do you if you can envision who you would like to
Mm,
be or the conversation you would like to have with your partner, what's the first step to that? And then let's look at the next step to that. And that's also the way I talk to kids, when we're talking about relationships, like when you imagine the kind of relationship you want to have,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
well, what are some early steps that sort of get that set up? Because you don't go right to the goal. You have to, it's a process. And I think for adults, the hard part is to realize that um, whereas kids have the opportunity to sort of start that process earlier and avoid some of the mistakes and pitfalls that maybe adults have fallen into, we don't have that opportunity. We can start from now
Mm-hmm.
and move forward with the awareness that it wasn't as good as it could have been in the past, that maybe we hurt or were hurt by people, that maybe we did a lot of things we wish we didn't do, but all that's going to do is drag us down and keep us from being able to move forward. So starting from now, looking ahead, what do I want? What's an initial step? And certainly for, I mean, I don't do therapy, but certainly in the education that I do, you don't start with sex.
Mm-hmm.
Start with something much easier.
Mm-hmm.
Like with relationships, with kids, you don't start with sex. You start with something much easier, and then you and
Mm-hmm.
then you move up to that,
Mm-hmm.
um, because that just feels too big and too scary and too hard.
Yeah. And I don't know why the way you phrased it helped me see something in a different way as far as with couples and trying to bring awareness to this idea, casting the vision of sexual health being instead of saying, I want you to learn to be okay when I say no, which I think is maybe the goal is, but that's not the
Yeah,
vision. The vision being, let's build a sexual life together that's mutually enjoyable, non-exploitative, values consent, that we value honesty. And so then whenever the no comes up, going back to the vision of, oh, you're right, we wanted an honest, mutually enjoyable,
right,
non-exploitative relationship. This is part of that process.
right,
You just kind of help me figure out how, for couples, you cast a vision that doesn't feel restrictive, shaming,
right,
and controlling of the other partner.
right.
But,
Yeah, the way I frame it with teenagers is that, when you're fighting with your sweetheart, you want the relationship to win. If
mm-hmm,
either of you wins, probably the relationship doesn't win. So what's the
hmm
solution that allows this relationship that you've created together
hmm
to win, to move
yeah,
forward? And I think
yeah,
that's kind of what you're saying there is like what when couples think about that, oh, what's the thing that's going to allow us to
yeah,
continue together happily and on this path? And sometimes that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of undoing.
mhm,
And some couples are going to find that they actually don't have the same vision.
right.
And that's really hard, but boy, it's better to know that than not know that.
Yeah, I think that's some of the rock and hard place many of these women experience is if I'm really honest here, this isn't working, and that will affect my living situation, my access to financial resources, my access to my
Sure.
children, you're right. And so then it's this huge, it becomes
Right.
larger than do you want to have sex?
Yeah. And that pulls you back to the hierarchical stuff and the
hmm
patriarchy and all that. Sure. But I mean, who wouldn't say yes when all of that is on the line,
hmm
whether you want to or not? Who wouldn't say sure, whatever?
hmm hmm
Because it's so heavily weighted with so much other stuff.
hmm
Yeah. And
Yeah.
again, that's the awareness that both parties in the relationship need to
Mhm.
recognize. Um,
Mhm.
and it can be easy for stereotypically for a man to say, oh, look, really, this is just about like right now, and do you want to have sex right now? This is not about like, am I going to support you tomorrow?
Right.
But words
For
don't
her, it
get,
is.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Both people have to wake up to the system that they're
mhm,
in. And in this situation, it might be the only the females we interviewed were open to the consequences of a no, and their partners might not have.
Yeah.
Thought about that.
Right.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. Question
Yep.
6. We've kind of
Okay.
worked through them. And I know you're not a therapist,
Yep.
but do you see this as, do you see these women as having low desire, low sexual desire, or do you see this as something different?
Yeah, I don't see it as low sexual desire. I see it as something different.
Hmm.
I see it as um, perhaps as a system that sort of constructs sexual interactions and sexual models in a way that doesn't um, fairly reflect the reality that many women are in when it
Hmm.
comes to these consent situations. So
Hmm.
they come out looking like they have low desire
Hmm.
when when they may not. It's just that the weight of all this other stuff makes
Hmm.
it hard to relax, right? So like what allows sexual desire to flow freely, to what allows us to really respond to sexual desire and to feel it, right? There's got to
Hmm.
be a sense of freedom. There's got to be a sense of there's going to be a good outcome for me.
Hmm.
There's got to be a sense of my pleasure and desires matter.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that when those conditions aren't there, it's not fair to then say, well, you have low desire. But
Hmm.
no, I don't have the conditions that allow my desire to be respected and to be
Yeah.
actualized.
Yeah.
Um, now, of course, and also just from my perspective as a sex educator,
Mhm.
like people have really different levels of desire.
Mhm.
And part of the other problem is there's this expectation that we're all going to be horny all the time for everybody.
Right.
And it's just not the way we work.
Hmm.
And,
Hmm.
so if a relationship moves to a place where the people in it are fine with it becoming far less sexual and more affectionate, well, then, I guess that has to be okay, right? That can be fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Hmm.
But again, it's that communication and it's that mutual understanding.
Hmm. I mean, I agree, and I find it difficult as a therapist because Mhm. I think too often we're having this conversation about low desire and
Hmm.
not the conversation about the conditions necessary for desire,
Hmm.
right? And so then, you know, I get a woman in my office who said, my husband says I have to come, you know, and we're trying to fix, we're looking at it through like an individual diagnosis lens, which I don't think it is. I think it's a
Right.
context, a
Yeah.
dynamic, a conditions, what they've created together as their norms and their roles in there.
Right.
But we don't, but we're then just like selling books about desire and doing
Yeah.
desire interventions. And I'm like, I don't know if that's going to work for that.
Right. We don't frame it that way. Yeah. 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 No, I'm totally in agreement with you. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I think in some ways it just, when we classify these women as having low desire or having some kind of d- disorder of desire,
Hmm.
then we're we're moving in exactly the opposite direction of where we want to go. We're
Hmm.
um, we're pathologizing women for responding to this this um, sort of arcade game they've been put into, and where the rules aren't fair.
Yeah.
And so they're recognizing that, and they don't want to play the game. Well, nobody says, well, wait, the problem is the game or
Yeah.
the player.
Hmm. Like,
So
why do we
whether
want to
that
play this
game's
game?
right, whether that game is the relationship or whether that game is something larger, um, if it just comes down to, well, you're a bad player,
Hmm.
then you never have to think about the game
Hmm.
or the other people in the game. It
Hmm.
takes what it as you said, it takes this is really a communal issue or problem or situation, and our tendency is to reduce it to you have a problem. right?
Hmm.
Which happens all the time and is really unfair.
Yeah,
Um,
and that might come through some of our US values of individualism instead
yep,
of collectivism, right?
yep, yep.
Right.
But that also can be useful in terms
Mhm.
of um, when I've talked to some young women about how unfair some of these situations are. Um, they then get angry and empowered
Mm.
as opposed to feeling defeated.
Mhm.
So, for some people, that awareness of the game, um, for some people, it makes them feel like, well, I can't win anyway, so what the hell? But there are some people who feel like, wow, it's not my fault. There's something bigger going on here, and I don't want that. I want to,
Yeah.
there is something I can do, and it's not just about fixing me. Like, yeah, there are certain things I can develop my skills and I can work on, but it the whole thing is not just housed in me,
Right. Yeah.
because that's
I've
such a
seen a
heavy
lot of,
burden.
it's a heavy burden. I've seen a lot of relief. I've gotten a lot of emails from women that are speaking of the relief when they realized I might not be broken. It might be the system that we're operating in that's broken.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. So our last question, what were some of your thoughts that I didn't ask about? Just like this op-ed commentary of, because you could have seen something that I didn't see, so I didn't ask a question about it.
Yeah. Um, it just made me think about how how difficult we've made it, we, the larger we, the societal we, to do this very natural thing, which is to love each other
Mm,
and to like we're made for connection. We're made to come together. We're made to cooperate.
mm,
We're wired that way. We need it. We're social animals. It really does take a village. It's better for us to be in community,
mm,
and yet there are all these ways where we we stop that or block that or push against that, um, and it's bad for all of us.
mm,
But there's a larger system that says that's not what really matters, right? And again, this individualism, this exceptionalism,
mm,
this I'm going to come out on top, this competition versus cooperation. Um, that when you look at so many of our systems, uh, it's not a surprise that we're so screwed up in so many ways when
mm,
it comes, especially to sex and relationships. And every generation wants to do better by their kids, but unless that generation becomes more aware of the systems
mm.
that are surrounding them and their kids, we're just going to wind up repeating the same pattern. We're just going to keep giving people the same, inadequate set of skills or inadequate information, and then
Yeah.
say, "Oh, gee, why didn't that work?" So
Mm,
in some ways it did really make me sad because I thought, oh, we really haven't like
uh,
come as far as I hope we have.
mm,
But on the other hand, you know, um, we this may sound much more haughty than I mean it, but like we kind of know what the solution is,
mm,
and it's just about getting people to hear it and to believe it. I mean, I've worked at a school for 30 years as the sex educator, and the the sort of progress I have made is so tiny compared to what I really had hoped we could do.
yeah.
And but it's progress, right? It's
It is progress. And I hear what you're saying when it's making me think about is in the research for this dissertation, how many years have we spent on consent and affirmative consent in colleges?
right.
And there was a statistic that 90% of college-age girls give consent by saying nothing. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, how many millions of dollars have we spent? And we only have 10% of women in college age, using verbal consent instead of just
Right.
saying nothing. Yeah, that we've had the effort, a lot of effort, but we're
Hmm.
seeing change happen really slowly.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
And part of that is because, part of it is because we insist on the focus of lessons being on, teaching women how to not get raped versus teaching men not to rape, right?
Yeah.
Putting the efforts.
Hmm.
And quite frankly, the efforts go where, this is a little Machiavellian, but the efforts go where the system lets it go, right?
Mm,
Um, and pushes it away from where it really might affect and impact change.
mm,
Because there's a lot of people who like the system the way it is
mhm,
and are getting great benefit from it.
mhm,
Um, and so that's why for me, when I think about the global situation and the national situation and all that, um, my response to that scariness and is to get smaller, right?
mhm, mhm,
So how do I get my school community
mm,
a little better informed about this, right? And then it's because the solution has to be bottom up. It's never going to work top down.
mm,
So what are we doing with the connections that we have? I mean, that's why I love therapy and I love therapists, because the benefit that I've had from therapy in my whole life is somebody who's been helping me get aware about myself and about larger systems, and who's not trying to fix the world, who's
mm,
trying to help me figure out strategies that then I can take and each one teach one. Um, so we make progress, um, but yeah, our big programs don't. They don't do it.
mm. What's it like as an educator to say that our big programs don't?
Oh, I mean, well, if you've been in education for a long time, like I have,
Mm-hmm.
you know that. So that's
Mm-hmm.
just a fact of your life, and your life is constantly figuring out, how do I keep doing it despite that? And
Yeah.
you've got to have ways to feel like you are effective enough,
Mm-hmm.
or that you are affecting change in some way. And that's, for me, that's just the number of students who talk to me years after they've graduated to say, I still
Sure.
remember this conversation, or
Sure.
this really affected the way I am in relationships. And it's
Mm-hmm.
not every kid by far, but it's enough that tells me, you know, if I hadn't done this work, we wouldn't be that far.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it's a game of inches. And it's
And I
planting
hadn't,
seeds.
yeah, a game of inches. And I hadn't necessarily thought about it that way, that the top down is not going to work. And I thought, well, it should. And then I'm like, that's the
Right.
water I swim in. That's the hierarchy. I'm like,
Yeah.
everything has this big umbrella and then it filters. I mean, even top down economics or even like
Yeah,
top down power. Like, and so it was funny, even as you said that, I was like, but it's supposed to work because that's the way
totally.
instead of the conditioning of it really is bottom up is what's
Mhm.
gonna be influential.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
So I think that the the work that you've begun with this dissertation is creating this great opportunity to then, for those women in the study, to go back and create opportunities for them to, and for their partners to, like, see what's happening, to affect some, to maybe affect some change there, and then they figure something out that they share with their friends and family, and then
mhm,
you know um, and I
mhm,
don't, who knows, whenever we're going to get lucky and influence somebody who's going to become one of the big powerful people in the system, who might
Might.
have enough resilience to get there and
Mm.
still be able to push back and really try to change things.
Yeah.
Um, I have to hold out hope that that's at least possible.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's likely, but it's possible. If
Hmm.
it's possible, there's reason to get up in the morning and keep doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. This was helpful. I really appreciate your lens, your expertise, that you have, like I said, your foot in so many cool communities, and I appreciated. I don't want to operate in an echo chamber. I don't want to write a book from an echo chamber,
Right.
especially. And so I really appreciate you being willing to say, hey, I don't even know you, but I'm willing to have a conversation with
Yeah.
you. I appreciate it so much.
It's my pleasure. I think you're doing great work, and I really am. I'm really inspired by the questions you're asking, and yeah. And I thought maybe I have something to contribute that could be
Hmm.
useful. So I'm glad it
You
was.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I really
Always happy to
appreciate it.
talk more. Yeah,
Okay.
anytime.
Okay. I hope you have a good day.
Thanks, Cami. You too. Take
Okay.
care. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.